Black neighborhood corner stores in the 1960s and 1970s were not just places to buy bread and milk. They were the beating heart of communities where trust was currency, credit was given on a handshake, and everyone knew your name before you walked through the door. These weren't corporate chains with scanners and security cameras. These were family operations run by people who lived in the same neighborhood, attended the same churches, and understood that survival sometimes meant helping each other through hard times. The man behind the counter knew your grandmother, gave your father his first job, and would extend credit until Friday when paychecks arrived. But one by one, these corner stores vanished, replaced by convenience chains and big-box retailers that had no memory, no mercy, and no connection to the people they served. What died with those stores was more than commerce. It was community itself. Mr. Johnson's corner grocery on the end of the block operated on a system that would be impossible today. The worn spiral notebook behind the counter held names and running tabs, amounts owed written in pencil and updated weekly. Black families knew that when money got tight between paychecks, Mr. Johnson would write it down. You could get eggs, bread, milk, whatever you kids needed, and pay when you got paid. There were no interest charges, no credit checks, no applications. There was only your word and the understanding that everyone struggled sometimes. Mr. Johnson had been in that same spot for 20 years by the time the 1960s arrived, watching neighborhood kids grow up and start families of their own. He knew who could be trusted and who couldn't, not from algorithms or credit scores, but from years of watching how people conducted themselves. When someone fell on especially hard times, losing a job or facing medical bills, Mr. Johnson would sometimes quietly forgive a debt, marking it paid in his book while the customer was none the wiser. This wasn't charity in the formal sense, it was community care, the understanding that keeping neighbors fed and dignified mattered more than collecting every dollar owed. Kids were sent to Mr. Johnson's with handwritten notes from their mothers, listing what was needed and promising payment on Friday. He would fill the order, send the child home with groceries, and add the amount to the family's page in his notebook. The system worked because shame and honor still meant something in neighborhoods where reputation was everything. The corner butcher shop run by the Williams family represented a dying art by the 1970s. Mr. Williams stood behind a glass case filled with fresh cuts, wearing an apron stained from decades of work. He knew every customer's preferences, every family's Sunday dinner traditions, every grandmother's specific requests. When Mrs. Thompson came in on Saturday morning, he already knew she wanted a small roast for Sunday dinner, cut thick with a little extra fat for flavor. When young couples came in nervous about feeding guests, he would recommend cuts that looked impressive but didn't break tight budgets. The butcher shop smelled like sawdust and cold meat, with hooks hanging from the ceiling and a massive wooden cutting block worn smooth from use. Mr. Williams would disappear into the walk-in cooler and emerge with exactly what you needed, sometimes cutting special orders right there while you waited. He gave soup bones away free to elderly customers, knowing they would use them to make meals stretch further through the week. During holidays, the butcher shop became command central for the neighborhood's celebration meals. Families would order their Thanksgiving turkeys and Christmas hams weeks in advance, and Mr. Williams kept meticulous records of who wanted what and when they would pick it up. He extended credit during holiday seasons, understanding that families needed to put food on tables even when money was especially tight. The relationship was reciprocal. When Mr. Williams needed his roof repaired, men from the neighborhood showed up without being asked. When his son needed a job, people made calls and opened doors. The butcher shop was more than a business. It was a node in a network of mutual obligation and care. The pharmacy with the soda fountain counter was where teenagers went after school and adults stopped for coffee before work. The long counter had round swivel stools covered in cracked red vinyl, and behind it stood tall glass dispensers filled with Coca-Cola syrup and carbonated water. The pharmacist, Dr. Patterson, wore a white coat and filled prescriptions in the back, while his wife managed the fountain. She made cherry cokes, vanilla phosphates, and ice cream sodas that kids saved their allowances to buy. But the soda fountain was more than treats. It was a gathering place where news traveled faster than telephones could carry it. Teenagers sat at the counter doing homework, discussing who was dating whom, and planning weekend activities. Adults lingered over coffee, sharing job leads and discussing political developments. The pharmacy became an unofficial community center where people connected across generations. Dr. Patterson knew every family's medical history, not from computer databases, but from decades of personal knowledge. He would counsel patients about medications, warn about interactions, and sometimes quietly extend credit for prescriptions that families couldn't afford immediately. He understood that medicine delayed was medicine denied, and that pride prevented many from asking for help directly. So he simply added it to their account, to be paid when possible, and nobody outside those involved ever knew. When civil rights tensions ran high in the 1960s, the pharmacy became a place where community members gathered to share information, discuss strategy, and find comfort in numbers. The soda fountain counter had witnessed first kisses, job celebrations, and grief over assassinations. The vinyl stools held memories that no chain pharmacy could ever replicate. The small storefront that sold penny candy sat between two larger businesses, easy to miss if you didn't know it existed. Inside, glass jars lined shelves from floor to ceiling, each one filled with different candies sold individually or by tiny weight. Kids saved coins to buy Jawbreakers, Mary Janes, Tootsie Rolls, licorice whips, and wax bottles filled with colored sugar water. The old woman who ran the store knew exactly which candies each child preferred, and she had witnessed taste preferences change as kids grew from elementary school into teenagers. She would sometimes add an extra piece to a child's bag when she sensed they were having a hard day, recognizing sadness in young faces before they could articulate what they felt. The penny candy store operated on thin margins that big retailers would have considered pointless, but profit wasn't the only purpose. The store gave the old woman purpose, community, and connection. She knew which kids came from homes where money was very tight, and she kept track of who might need an extra piece or two. During Halloween, she would stay open late, giving away candy to trick-or-treaters until her supply ran out. The small storefront was where children learned to count money, make choices, delay gratification, and interact with adults outside their families. They learned to say please and thank you, to wait their turn, to respect the process of commerce. These lessons happened naturally in the course of buying candy, absorbed without anyone delivering formal instructions. When she finally closed the store in the late 1970s, unable to compete with convenience chains, an entire block of children lost something irreplaceable. The record shop tucked into a basement was where black teenagers discovered music that radio stations sometimes refused to play. The owner, a man everyone called Jazz because of his encyclopedic knowledge and passionate love of music, kept listening stations where customers could preview albums before buying. He would pull records based on what he thought you needed to hear, not just what you asked for, and he was rarely wrong. Jazz knew the difference between Motown's polished sound and Stax's raw emotion. He could trace musical lineages across decades and explain how gospel influenced soul, which birthed funk. Teenagers would spend hours in that basement, listening to everything from Miles Davis to James Brown, educating themselves in a history that schools didn't teach. The record shop became an informal classroom where black musical heritage was preserved and transmitted. Jazz extended payment plans for albums that customers couldn't afford in a single purchase, allowing them to put down $1 and pay the rest over weeks. He understood that music wasn't luxury, but necessity, especially for young people trying to understand their identity in a world that often devalued them. The walls were covered with promotional posters, album covers, and photographs of musicians who had visited the store over the years. When someone needed a DJ for a party or wanted to know about upcoming concerts, Jazz had the information before it appeared anywhere official. He was a curator, educator, and community historian operating from a basement with a cash register and turntables. When bigger music retailers moved into the neighborhood in the late 1970s, they carried more inventory, but none of Jazz's knowledge, passion, or personal investment in his customers' musical education. The shoe repair shop, operated by an elderly man with hands gnarled from decades of leatherwork, represented practical economy that today's disposable culture has completely abandoned. People brought shoes to be resoled, boots to be restitched, and bags to be repaired, rather than simply throwing them away and buying new ones. The shoe repair man worked slowly and meticulously, using tools and techniques that hadn't changed in 50 years. He would examine each item carefully, explaining what could be saved and what was beyond repair. Most things, he believed, were worth saving if you cared enough to do the work. The shop smelled like leather and polish, with shelves holding finished repairs waiting to be picked up. He charged modest prices that reflected value and craft rather than maximum profit. Elderly customers especially depended on him because their fixed incomes made replacing shoes regularly impossible. He understood this and sometimes charged less than materials cost, treating repair work as community service. Young men would bring their church shoes